Hey everyone, welcome to another Visual Studio Code tutorial. If you've been keeping up with this channel in particular, you actually know that I've been doing some front-facing camera stuff. Still working on the audio and video quality of that. If you want to know more about my struggles, you can actually go to my personal YouTube channel. I've been trying to put up some videos there. In this tutorial video, we're going to take a look at building things inside of Visual Studio Code. Now, I do .NET development during the day, and I do a lot of TypeScript development, and when I do the bot framework stuff, that's all written in TypeScript as well. So doing builds and using Visual Studio Code is very important to me, and it's really easy to work with. Now, here I actually have a blank folder with nothing in it. If you actually have a file in here, and we'll just call it app.ts, and we do a Control-Shift-B for build, what you're going to notice is that it has no build task to run or found. I want you to configure a build task. I can actually click on this, and it wants to create a task.json file from a template. I can click on that, and it gives me some suggestions. So it starts off with MS Build, Maven, .NET Core. We're going to get back to MS Build. I'm going to say Other, and this kind of gives you like a basic echo shell, right? So that's not very helpful. But one of the things that we can actually do here is we can start putting in some information. So let's say I'm going to save that real quick. Now, generally, when you do this, see how it still says no build task run, but then it suggests that you use the echo one, which the echo one, of course, won't do anything. Now, one of the things that you can do is actually put a tsconfig file in here if you're doing TypeScript development. Paste that tsconfig file right in there. Now I need to make sure that it includes everything. Don't worry about the tsconfig file right now. And we'll just delete this here. Save that. And I don't really need this. Now you'll notice that with the tsconfig in here, if I do a Control-Shift-B, it actually has already detected what it wants to do. So it wants to do a tsc build, tsconfig.json, or you can do a watch. So if I just click on that, it'll of course build it, and I'll get whatever build errors I need. Notice over here it actually generated out the code. So you can see that even though you have the build task, which does the task.json, if you're doing something like TypeScript development, the tsconfig file, by having that, Visual Studio will actually recognize that and ask you which one you want to do. Now that's very basic stuff. So now let's start over. Okay, so I'm going to delete the tsconfig file. Yes, move that to recycling bin. This folder doesn't matter, but I'm going to go in here and I'm going to delete this task.json file. And we can close these out because they don't really matter. Now let's do a Control-Shift-B again. No build tasks found, configure to build. I'm going to create one. Now we're going to do an MS build. So now you see this gives you a lot more verbose information. Now this is an actual schema, so you can actually go to this link for documentation on task.json. It's on the Visual Studio Code website. You can see all of the various things that you can put in here. One of the important things to remember is that you basically have an array of tasks. Now this is for building. You can run any task in here, but I'm concentrating on building right now. So what you can see is this is a task. They labeled it build. It's a shell command. We run MS build, and here's some arguments. So these are properties that are actually passed into MS build. So you could actually put your configuration equals dev or test or release in here as well. These get passed right to MS build. And you see we've grouped it as a build task. Now if you hover over these properties inside Visual Studio, it'll tell you. So like if I hover over a group, it says defines to which execution group this task belongs. It supports build to add it to the build group and test to add it to the test group. And then it says that build marks the task as a build task accessible through run build task. And then it has a silent presentation mode. And then, of course, the problem matcher to output to problems over here. Now, of course, I can try to run this, and it likely will fail. We just did build here. You see it gives me an MS build error, specify a project or solution file. So there's no solution file, and there's no SLN file, and there's no CSproj file, right? Because we did not create them. But that gives you an overview of kind of doing the MS build, right? So let's look at something more advanced. So this project actually has a lot more involved in it because this is a typical web application. If you're doing an ASP.NET web or ASP.NET MVC or web API application, you're going to kind of have multiple things. You might have a front end with TypeScript, and then you have the back end is running an MS build. So how do we handle that? Well, once again, here's tasks, which is an array of tasks. So pay no attention to this first one. What I want you to look at is these next ones, right? So here is our MS build task. Let me highlight that for you. And you see that the label is MS build. It's a shell type. It will run MS build. Here are the arguments that I passed in. Here's the aforementioned configuration equals debug. The group is build. The presentation I always like to have my output, and of course the problem matcher is set up. Then here's this second one. The label is TypeScript. Type is TypeScript. The tsconfig is pointing to my tsconfig, so these are additional values that are actually allowed into the build. The problem matcher is, of course, TSC, which will print out to the problem statement, and a group, of course, is build. So there we have two tasks. Both of them are grouped with build. So normally, if you were to do this, so if I get rid of this right here, and I save that, and I do Control-Shift-B, it'll say, okay, which one do you want to build? Do you want to build TypeScript? Do you want to build MS build? Well, I kind of want to run everything at once, right? And that's where this task comes into play. So this one is actually my labeled build task. And you see that this task depends on TypeScript and MS build. So what that means, and if we hover over this, this is the other task this task depends on. If you use depends on, it will run these builds, or these tasks, I should say, before it executes its own task. Now, this one is not actually a task at all. And you'll see that the group that I have here is build, but I have this is default in here. So previously, this was just group is a string. And here you see that group is an object. Kind equals build, and I have is default set to true. So what that means is that if I do a Control-Shift-B, let me save this first. If I do a Control-Shift-B, it will automatically run, since is default is true, this task here. This task doesn't actually do anything other than depend on TypeScript and MS build. So it actually will execute the TypeScript task and the MS build task, both of which are build tasks, in order to complete this particular task, which means that you can now run multiple builds at once. So if we come over here, of course, you can see task 2 is an MS build, task 1 has TypeScript. Now, MS build actually has its own component for compiling TypeScript, so you could actually run MS build and it'll compile your TypeScript and it'll run the regular build task. But this was just a quick way for me to show you how you can actually run multiple build tasks within a single task using depends on.